our faith, and there are times when people have said, well, things in the Bible really didn't exist. I'll just give you some examples. The Hittite Empire was unknown for the longest time, and they said that whole part of Scripture was incorrect. But we know that it was Hittite Empire. Pontius Pilate's position, we now have archaeological verification of his. You want? Is this not working?
It's not going to the left.
Well, maybe I don't know. Anyway, we'll get hooked up again and get back on it. A couple of other examples when we think about that. Pilate, some of the tunnels that have been found recently, and in King David's existence. All of these things we found over time from archaeological finds and geological finds that support areas where people said, well, the Bible says this and it didn't really exist. But as we learn, we find the answer to that. So here comes our question. Which came first? The chicken or the egg? How many of you think the egg came first? Raise your hand if you think the egg came first. Okay, we've got one person that thinks the egg, two people think the egg came first. I really appreciate you guys taking the negative approach because that makes it that much better. But everybody else thinks that the chicken came first, right? Why do you think the chicken came first? I'm sorry? Okay. Did you hear that? What'd she say? God created, and who named the animals? Adam named the animals. And so the chicken came first, unless you happen to believe in evolution, and then the egg came first, because the reptile egg is from how we get the chicken, or all birds. They come from reptiles, and reptiles lay eggs, and so therefore, if you accept evolution, which we don't, then the egg came first. But as you've all pointed out, it's the chicken, one of the birds that God created, and one of those birds that Adam named when he was naming all of the species of animals. Now, when we think about evolution, up until the 30s, the evolution people said there was no such thing as a beginning. And then in about 1930-something, this gentleman said, and came up with the Big Bang Theory. And there's something at the beginning of the Big Bang Theory. And all of these evolutionary theories that I've given you on this slide have a beginning. Whether it's this disk that's out in outer space, or it's this spinning cloud of dust, or any of these others, they all have a beginning point. And we know what the beginning point is, don't we? In the beginning, God created. And so these are theories that people have come up with, and they're really not provable because you can't go back and recreate them. And from a scientific standpoint, if you can't repeat something, then you have to ask questions as to whether or not it's correct or not. So that's just the Big Bang Theory. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the television program, The Big Bang, and it goes from nothing to humans all the way through dinosaurs and up. But you can see with the Big Bang Theory, there is a beginning. Something was there at the beginning. And people that believe in the Big Bang Theory and any of the evolutionary theories will tell you we know there's a beginning. And the question is, where did that beginning come from? Well, if we would just be comfortable and say, let's look at geology. And if we look at geology, we can show by looking at the layers and the fossilized material that's in there, we can pretty well show that it's a comparatively young Earth, not an Earth that was billions and billions of years old, but a relatively young Earth. But we couldn't allow ourselves to be happy with that because we have to accommodate science. We have to find a way that we can believe as Christians and still accept science for what most of the people would say. So there are a number of theories of creation that Christians, end quote, have come up with over the various periods of time. Supernatural versus evolutionary, supernatural appearance of history, and some of these theistic evolution theories that we're going to talk about, the gap theory, the apparent age theory, the punctuate 24-hour theory, and the day-age theory. So when we think about these, here's the first one, which basically says that biblical creation is symbolic, not literal. What it's going to tell us is there's something that happened between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. So this theory goes on that God's involved, God's in control, but he uses either directly or indirectly natural processes. He allows time to take its place, the millions and billions of years that are needed for the evolutionary process to take place. So he uses natural selection, mutations, and we'll say something next time about macro versus microevolution, so that we understand that there are things that do mutate and they do change at a micro level, not at a macro level. And so in this, it's either directly or indirectly that God allows the process to go on. And this process can take billions and billions of years, no different from from the Big Bang Theory or any of these other theories. It's just so that we can fit our Christian life into accepting science as it's laid out. It harmonizes scientific understanding with belief in God as creator. It's not in conflict, they would tell us, with our fate, but rather a divinely ordained process. The process goes on and on and on, but God's either directly controlling it or indirectly controlling it through natural selection, through mutations, and other pathways that may or may not be involved. Now, the gap theory says that there is this initial creation. It describes the initial creation of the universe and the earth. And then there's a gap of billions of years, vast periods of time, million or billions of years, exist between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. It describes the earth after this initial creation, suggesting it became a chaotic, desolate place. In Genesis 2, what does it say? It's formless and void. And this is how they get to this conclusion, to say that there's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And this is just kind of a schematic representation of the gap theory. You see the original creation, and there's this formless and void area, and then 6 days of recreation. The one I like even better than this is the one that's called the restoration theory. And this is the one where everything was going great, but the angels that were thrown out of heaven came down, and they just had this war between God and Satan and his angels, and it left the earth formless and void. And you see where they're getting this from Genesis chapter 1. So we've got the recent creation week and a recreation or restoration of what that was once destroyed. The universe existed for an indeterminate period of time before creation week began. And again, this allows for, you got Genesis 1, you have this chaos, and you have Genesis 2, and then God can speak everything into existence. And so this is just another argument that people are trying to put forth so that their Christianity will allow them to be followers of current scientific theories. And this is just a schematic representation. You have the original earth was formed in Genesis 1:1, and then there was this big battle between God and Satan, and we have this chaotic area, this formless area, and then everything goes back to normal, and we have, starting in Genesis 1:2, the 6 days of creation. So what in both of these people are trying to do is to say there's a time period between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And this then allows us to say, okay, we're good with billions and billions and billions of years because of that gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. But then once we get to Genesis 1:2, we go back to what the Bible says. And so they're trying desperately to meld science and the Bible by coming up with these types of theories or concepts. I was talking with somebody, I don't remember who it was, but a theory is just that. It's a proposition, something that people think may be correct. I've made a lot of hypotheses over my career, and about 98% of them turned out to be false when I did the experiment to try to prove whether or not what I thought was going to happen would happen. And this is pretty common in medicine. We make hypotheses about how a cancer drug works, and then we try to develop the pathways that are there. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. Sometimes a drug goes to market, sometimes a drug doesn't go to market. So this is not an uncommon practice within the scientific community. But what it is, it's not the scientists that are doing this, it's so-called Christians that are trying to develop a concept that will allow them to have really their cake and eat it too. I like this one, partly because of my age, but God created Adam and Eve old. This is the apparent age theory. So that's the reason we can say that the fossils were there, because God created everything grown up and old. But there's no reason to assume that Adam and Eve were old and wrinkly like Lynn and me. When you think about that, there's no reason to believe that. We do know that they were full grown, but it doesn't mean that they're 900 or whatever the oldest people were, and wrinkled. And in a lot of ways, it's blind speculation for all of these. And though Adam was created as a full-size human, it's not necessary to think that he had wrinkles or any other type of sign of aging, such as Carrie and white hair. I mean, there's no reason to make that assumption. He probably had that youthful hair that Carrie had when he was 20 years old or whatever, but we don't know the answer to that. And in some ways, if he did do that, it kind of makes him a prankster, somebody that is being a little counterproductive in what he was trying to do. And then we've got the punctuated 24-hour theory. And basically, this just squeezes millions and millions of years between each day. So God did something on day one, and whatever he created on day one, he let it ferment and he let it expand and grow. Day two, he created the next one. And again, all we're doing is to try to get an appeasement to the scientific world that says the world is billions and billions of years old, as opposed to just accepting what God told us in his word in Genesis. And there's really no ground for this in the text. When you think about the creation, you can look at it from the standpoint of parallel construction. These are the two big light times. God said, let there be light, and then in day 4, he brought in the stars and the moon and all of these other things which were to set aside the days and seasons of the year. And then the sky and the sea, fish and birds, dry land, land animals and humans. But in all of these, and we'll see this as we move forward, in God having Moses describe creation, what was the point he was trying to get across to his people for those future generations? When the Israelites in Joseph's time, what was he trying to get across when he went through this?
God was in charge.
God's in charge, but what is so important? What's the one thing they would all understand? You work 6 days and you rest the 7th day, just like God. And that's really, in my mind, one of the most important things that comes out of Genesis, that the Sabbath day is so very important in this. And if we just do a linear structure, you see it fold out in the same way. But again, the 7th day, when God rested, the Sabbath, is so very important. Yes?
Why did God change it? We don't go by the Sabbath.
That's New Testament. We're in the Old Testament right now. We'll talk about that later. There's always one in a crowd.
That's very
Wait till you get home.
Yeah, I know it. So what I do, where is a microphone? I want you to read Genesis. You got a microphone over there? No, he's got one. To read Genesis chapter 1. And I want you to listen to Genesis chapter 1 and think like a middle schooler. Not as a grown-up that's trying to dissect something, but as a middle schooler. And we're just going to read Genesis chapter 1. And I want you to listen to how many times the word day appears and how it appears. Okay?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. The darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning a second day. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them, after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens, to separate the day from the night, and let there be signs for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Then God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth, which has life. I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day.
Great. Thank you. You're that middle schooler, that seventh grader, reading this passage or hearing it read to you for the first time. How long's the day? How long's the day? You know, don't think. How long's the day? It's the day that we understand. It's the day that the nation of Israel would understood. But this is the biggest hang-up that we now have, is trying to make that day something that it's not. And I'm going to try to explain to you some of the thoughts that are out there and some of the theories that people have put up to try to justify, again, to find a way to handle the evolutionary theory of the vast majority of scientists that the earth is billions and billions of years old. But if you read it, it's simply straightforward. It's a 24-hour day, but people don't seem to want to do that. How long were the days in Genesis 1 and 2? Well, there's several possible meanings that you could have. Creation days are defined, as someone pointed out, by evening and morning. Are these days figurative? Not in the sense of applying 2 Peter 3:8 through 11. Can you turn and read that for us, Lynn?
But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is longsuffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with a fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up.
That's good. And again, we find here's an example of where day is used in a more expansive level. And where did you go? There you are. It's figurative to a point to mean something more than just themselves, tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. That's Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And it inaugurates the major biblical theme of the Sabbath. And I think that's why I tried to point that out earlier on. So when we think about the Hebrew word for day, and here it is up here, it often means a 24-hour period, but it can also have an indeterminate duration. Literally understanding will help us interpret each day as to whether it's a 24-hour day, it's a long period of time, or some figure of speech. When we think about progressive creatism, by which God, having created major animal and plants at the beginning of 6 days, and then these people would say, he made all these creations, and then he would just let time go by, these millions and billions of years, to see what happens until he gets, at the end of this lengthy period, the 6th day. So God created men of the dust by fiat. He just spoke it and it happened. And this whole idea of trying to make this an indeterminate period of time just doesn't fit the grammar and the historical aspects of Genesis chapter 1. So there's some support for the day-age theory. Day is sometimes used to describe a period of time longer than 24 hours. The day of the Lord would be an example. Day does not ordinarily refer to an extended period of time when it appears with a modifier. And if you notice in Genesis, each of these days, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and so on, there's always this modifier in front of it. 2 Peter states that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and we understand that. But that's not referring to a 24-hour day. Days are generally defined in Genesis 1:5 when he points out the light for day and the darkness for night. So when you think about the day-age theory, there really is no strong basis for it. People make the comment the sun and the moon are not created until the 4th day, and this indicates that it must have been a period of time, because how could the plants grow if they didn't have sun, or how could things take place on the earth? But the very purpose of the sun was to rule over the day, while the moon was to rule over the night. And again, if we don't look at the context and the purpose for it being there, we can find ourselves falling in the wrong direction. The framework interpretation basically divides the work of creation into 2 triads. And basically, you have the creative king and the kingdom, the luminaries, the lights, the fish and the birds, the sea and the air, and man and animals, the land and plants. There's all kinds of things that, to me, don't make a whole lot of sense, and this is a classic example, but people look at this as a way to get out of the 24-hour day that's so very obvious when you just read the chapter. In English, the Hebrew word is usually, it's translated into day, and it can mean more than one thing. It can be a 24-hour period for the earth rotating on its axis. There's 24 hours in a day, a period of daylight between dawn and dusk. It gets pretty hot during the day, but it cools down as night. These are just some of the ways that we use the term. An unspecified period back in my grandfather's day. These are the way we use the term, but again, it's context, how they're used. And in Genesis, they're used very specifically, and they all have the day 1, day 2, and so on. Well, there are Bible examples where 24-hour periods exist in Genesis 7:11. If you read this in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great depth burst forth. That's the specific day that's being talked about. Periods of darkness and light between dawn and dusk, Genesis 1:16. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and he made the stars also. And unspecified periods of time in Genesis chapter 2. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, the day that the Lord made the heavens and the earth. So they can be very specific, as we see in Genesis chapter 1, or they can be have much wider range, as some of these other passages point out. Most of the people that I've read are very strong in the fact that when there is a number, the first day, the second day, and so on, that is talking about a 24-hour period, and that determines how this Hebrew word for day is interpreted. If there is first day, second day, and so forth, you typically would interpret it as a 24-hour day. It's used something over 2,000 times in the Old Testament. Outside of Genesis 1, Yahweh plus a number is used 410 times, and with one exception, it's always an ordinary day. So if not only just in Genesis 1, but throughout Genesis, every time day is used with a number, and it's used 410 times in Genesis, it's a 24-hour day. So there are times when the Hebrew word yom and a number do not imply a literal 24-hour day, and there's about 38 times where this happens. Daniel 8:26 clearly implies a long period of time. And if someone would turn, let's just read that. I thought I put it up there, but I didn't. Have you got it? You got the microphone. Can you go ahead and read it?
Genesis 1:5 to 2:2.
Yep. Daniel 8:26.
Vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now.
Okay, so again, it's this extended period of time that he's talking about here. So in Exodus 20 and 9:11, I think in my mind it pretty much seals that it's a 24-hour day. God used 6 creation days of Genesis as a model for man's work week. You work 6 days and rest 1. He had his promised people in mind. I think he also had us in mind when he laid it out the way that he laid it out. Day 1 he did this, day 2 he did this, day 3 he worked those 6 days, and then on the 7th day he rested. Literal day is the most likely interpretation of the Genesis account. The universal Genesis 1:1, 6 days refers not to the establishment of the universe, but rather God's preparation of the garden. Again, here's just another example where people have tried to reinterpret things, that these 6 creative days that God talked about was God's preparation of the garden, and there are a number of arguments for and against it. The biggest issue here is the idea of the heaven and earth and the sky and land. Therefore, this formless and void is better recorded as an uninhabited wasteland. And again, they're just trying to find ways to turn something that's very obvious, a 24-hour day, into something that is not there. And then I'm just going to skip over these because we're getting close. The word yom with an ordinary number, first, second, almost universally refers to a literal day throughout the Old Testament, with one possible exception, and that's Hosea chapter 6 and verse 2. And I've quoted it up there for you so you can see it. In essence, the argument posed that the text itself, through its language and structure, indicates that the creation days were literally 24-hour days. And it really just goes back to what we talked about earlier, trying to find a way to get millions and billions of years into the book of Genesis, when it's so clearly stated in the book of Genesis that God created as He said He did within a 24-hour frame period. And that's just something that we cannot allow people to take away and begin to try to put into our minds and our hearts that what God told us through Moses is something beyond what's really there. There are 24-hour days. There are all kinds of theories to try to get multiple years into our minds when we need to stand firm. 24-hour days leading us to 7 days when we should work, and then that final day, the Sabbath day at the end. And they're waiting to get in, so we'll stop now. Thank you very much for your attention.